Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today we continue talking about the ongoing controversies surrounding China and the NBA. That country is getting way more influence in this American business and politics than it really should be. The NBA has become pretty notorious for catering to China recently too, something which many had not even known much about until they were called out for doing so in a previous episode of South Park, the cartoon comedy show. We of course covered that here extensively. In that episode featuring this story called Banned in China, well, it mostly focused on Disney and its movies and entertainment properties pandering to the sleeping giant nation. But a noteworthy but quick throwaway line in there too was when South Park called out the NBA for doing this as well. In addition, the South Park creators also put the NBA on blast when they issued their faux apology to China a week after that episode, saying they too love money more than freedom and democracy, a humorous take on a serious problem for companies that are really behaving this way. And if you take a look at the South Park joke apology again here, you can see they not only mention the NBA directly at the beginning, but also they reference the democracy thing as a way to mock the basketball league even more. As we discussed a bit previously, the NBA has hypocritically apologized to China when one of their workers simply spoke out in favor of democracy and freedom in Hong Kong. Keep in mind, the NBA is the same organization who removed their All-Star game from Charlotte over a bogus, meaningless LGBTQ alphabet bathroom issue. But now, they are also silencing people within their ranks who support democracy in Hong Kong over the strict authoritarian, human rights violating communist regime that's dominated that red nation for generations now. Next, the NBA took things one step further when they started kicking out actually paying fans from their games for daring to support the protesters in Hong Kong. For those who don't know about that city, Hong Kong is a semi-autonomous region of China. It's a big, very industrious city which has enjoyed many freedoms and much independence over the years due to its legacy rights inherited from the days of it being a British colony up until 1997, when ownership transferred back over to China proper. But many Hong Kongers appear to regret that decision now. You see, for as much as the radical left-wingers and SJWs hate colonialism, and as much as they despise Western influences in foreign lands, well, Britain ruling over Hong Kong for over 100 years, that's actually what made the city so big, productive, and prosperous. Hong Kong would have never become an international port and world superpower under the strict communist rule. And as we're seeing today and recently, China is finally trying to lock down that region and moving for a full and complete takeover and communist regime there too. This is why protests have been going on there for weeks now. And it's why the Hong Kongers are even sometimes seen waving Western and also American flags too, because they too wish they could enjoy the freedoms we have here now. Freedoms they once had too for generations until Britain's rule and their time was up there, unfortunately. But back to the National Basketball Association now. Here's a story from BuzzFeed about how the NBA is kicking out fans who are supporting the pro-freedom movement in Hong Kong. It's called NBA Fans Supporting Hong Kong Protests Are Getting Kicked Out of Games and Their Signs Confiscated, with a subtitle that reads, "I don't see how it was any more or less disruptive than an average NBA fan holding up a sign and screaming at players, and those people don't get kicked out." That's a pretty good point. NBA fans and other ones too in other sports, they hold signs and yell and scream about teams and other stuff all the time. Sometimes they even get heated and rambunctious while they do it too. But now that we've got a few calm people wearing pro-Hong Kong shirts and sporting signs, which are pretty peaceful yet also powerful, well, they're getting kicked out of the games now. So why is there a difference here, you might ask? Well, if it's not already obvious, the NBA is under China's thumb at this point. They want to continue to make billions of dollars by visiting and streaming in and selling to customers over there so bad, they're willing to kowtow to the sleeping giant and silence their opposition even if it's in our own free nation, where we should have freedom of speech and expression. Granted, the NBA likely has every right to kick out any fans they want from their events, but this is still messed up, and it's still wrong, and it still goes to show they're putting money above freedom and communism above democracy. And to put it bluntly, the NBA is selling out and becoming rather pathetic and un-American. The article goes on to say, several fans were escorted out of NBA preseason games this week after holding up signs and voicing support for pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong, as the league grapples with the backlash over its statements in support of China. At least 3 fans at games in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. reported being removed from the arenas, while others said officials confiscated their free Hong Kong signs. Patrick Hedger, 29, of Arlington, Virginia, told BuzzFeed News security officials at the Washington Wizards game asked him to leave Capital One Arena Wednesday night after he held up a sign and yelled free Hong Kong inside the arena. Hedger, who lived temporarily in the semi-autonomous Chinese territory in 2002 and 2011, said the ongoing protests sparked by a bill that would have allowed extraditions to China have been breaking my heart. Sounds like a horrible situation all around there, for sure. Of course, the Americans getting their signs taken and getting ejected from games here, their bad stories do, of course, pale in comparison to what's happening in Hong Kong. The Hong Kongers are literally losing their rights and facing possible extradition to China, which surely would lead to them being imprisoned, forced into labor, and possibly even worse. You can't speak out against the government or its leaders there. That awful communist regime will lock you up if you do. So it makes perfect sense why Hong Kong would want to remain free, and even why they're trying to gain their own independence, much like how our American ancestors fought for our own independence years ago during our Revolutionary War, which started around 1776. And ironically enough though, back then we were fighting for freedom from Great Britain, but in today's situation, I'm pretty sure Hong Kong would prefer to still be under Britain's rule, especially over having to deal with the oppressive Chinese government. Next, things get even worse in a viral video that's been going around, featuring a horrible reaction to questions about this situation, which were being asked of the Golden State Warriors coach Steve Kerr. Here he defends China in the most embarrassing way possible by trying to say we in America have our own problems too. And while this of course is true, no country is perfect of course, but we are also certainly worlds away from being as terrible as those authoritarians over there who silence free speech and disappear people in that middle kingdom. Just take a look at this video as Kerr struggles to answer a question of a reporter who asked whether or not he got questioned about these issues while touring with his team in China just recently. Check this one out.
It has not come up in terms of people asking me about it, people discussing it. No. Nor has our record of human rights abuses come up either. Things that our country needs to look at and resolve. That hasn't come up either.
Well, I wonder if Kerr realizes the reason these things aren't coming up in China is because they own the media over there. And if those people asked him about the regime's crimes, the reporters would literally get sent to a prison camp. Also, while it seems to make sense to acknowledge that no country is perfect here, I do think it's a bit misleading since China is one of the world's great offenders of human rights. And the fact that the NBA and its coaches and teams are now kowtowing to them so they can make even more money, that really says a lot. I mean, these guys were already extremely rich and wealthy to begin with. Keep in mind, the NBA has been doing exceedingly well money-wise for generations. So sure, while making even more money is always a goal in the business world, you do have to ask yourselves here, at what cost? How much farther will they go to make even more billions of dollars? Because right now, the shady stuff they are looking away from in order to make even more money, it's making them look worse and worse, especially considering all these NBA people were already filthy, stinking rich to begin with. Perhaps if they were broke or just starting out, that might be one thing, but to kowtow to China so you can have $20 billion instead of just 15, well, that makes this whole pandering thing even worse.
So none of us are perfect, and we all have different issues that we have to get to. And saying that is my right as an American. Doesn't mean that I hate my country. It means I want to address things, right? But people in China didn't ask me about
Next, Kerr brings up weapons-related incidents in the United States for literally no good reason. This is classic whataboutism talk here too. The reporter brings up big, huge, gaping problems that are ongoing with the government the NBA is intentionally pandering to, and then this coach goes on to try and call out the United States for things that are basically unrelated and irrelevant and not directly caused by our government. Sure, we've had some incidents with people getting killed in the US here and there, but those issues weren't brought on by our government at all. He's talking about independent, crazy people going nuts on killing sprees in relatively small, isolated incidents too. Not to downplay them or anything, but it doesn't really compare to what's going on in that Red Dragon state and their problems at all, since they have their own government enforcing these strict, rights-violating policies that are directly getting people silenced, jailed, and even killed. And sometimes their organs get harvested, and that's being done by their government. So with all that said, this is a pretty low IQ response to this issue, I must say. Sure, Steve Kerr is an excellent coach, and his knowledge about basketball is great, but his thoughts on world news and social and political issues is pretty much dogshit. And it's also pretty hilarious that he has the balls to say he's an American and he has the right to say things about the United States in this clip too, since, the Chinese don't have that right, and they would get sent to gulags for speaking out half as much as Coach Kerr is here. Not to mention, Kerr is conveniently using his freedom of speech not to speak out against the human rights violating China, but to speak out to the freedom-loving United States, who's made him rich and made a company that's made a career for him and his team. So his silence on the Big Red Nation is becoming quite deafening. Next, the NBA further disgraces America when they snatch away a microphone from a reporter after she asked two NBA stars what they thought about freedom of expression following a controversy over a pro-Hong Kong tweet. This article from Summit News has more details. It says, after Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey tweeted in support of the Hong Kong protest movement, China pulled almost all sponsorships and NBA broadcasts, forcing the NBA into a groveling apology. Since then, numerous other major American brands and corporations have caved to the communist Chinese government and muzzled their own representatives. During a press conference, CNN's Christina McFarland asked, the NBA has always been a league that prides itself on its players and coaches being able to speak out openly about political and social affairs. I just wonder, after the events of this week and the fallout we've seen, whether you would both feel differently about speaking out in that way in the future. And this simple, level-headed, and totally relevant question is what resulted in an NBA staffer intercepting it and taking the microphone away from this reporter. Sounds like freedom of speech is only allowed in the NBA as long as they're not speaking out against the communists. Talking shit about America and President Trump is perfectly fine though, and it's not something I would want to stop here either. Make no mistake. I mean, sure, I think they're wrong when they compare the atrocities in the East to relatively mild incidents in the West that are bad but still not as bad, and I think these people are wrong to even attempt to put the US in the same playing field as China here, especially when it comes to human rights violations, but at the same time, I will also stand by their freedom of speech and their right to say whatever they please, no matter how dumb and off-base the words they spew out actually end up being. If only the Far East red state would offer its people the same privilege, or if it would let those they do business with have the same freedoms too, then we wouldn't even be having these horrible issues we're currently dealing with now in current year. In the end, things have gotten so bad with the NBA controversies and their press conferences have become such a joke, they actually decided to stop having them last week. Here you can see CNN commenting on how the NBA has canceled all media access for the remainder of its visit to China, as it puts players in a complicated and unfair situation, it said. Complicated maybe, but unfair these questions are not. When your company moves to do dealings with one of the world's biggest human rights violators, you naturally open yourself up to questions about them. And isn't it funny, or rather very hypocritical, how the NBA has no problem imposing their own moral compass onto the public here in the United States, like when they took away the All-Star game from Charlotte over bogus SJW reasons. But at the same time, heaven forbid anyone say a single solitary negative thing about a terrible, very oppressive communist regime over in Asia, because hey, the NBA needs to get even richer, even if it means dealing with and looking the other way when horrible dictatorships severely mistreat their people and those they're dealing with. What do you guys think about this story? Is the NBA on its way out in terms of popularity and or credibility? Will you be able to watch the basketball games this year in the same way that you might have before, knowing what we know now? And do you think the NBA even needs more billions of dollars anyway? Seems like it's a little much, especially considering what they've had to do to make themselves even more obscenely rich. Comment your thoughts on everything below, and thanks for watching No Bullshit. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and we'll see y'all next time.